Hi and welcome to this episode of Hiking Back in Time. Took a little road trip today up to the small mountain town of Rossland BC. We're going to investigate the remains of an old plane wreck up on the mountains high above Rossland BC. Before we take a hike into the forest, we're going to go over to the Rossland Museum and Discovery Center and meet up with Ron Dennett. He's done an awful lot of research on the crash site, and we'll have a look and see what the museum's got in store. Later on, we're going to visit with someone who was actually on Red Mountain when the plane flew over. Enjoy the episode. If you want to find out the history of a small town, go and visit their local museum. The Rossland Museum is no exception. Ron Dennett is a volunteer at the Rossland Museum, and he did a lot of research on the plane wreck. I had a chance to sit down and talk to him about it.
My main career was flying, but since a kid I've always been interested in aviation, airplanes and helicopters, and history as well. So not just aviation history, but that's right in my wheelhouse. If there's a World War II vintage plane crash around, then I'd be all over checking that out. And then I've been involved with the museum as a volunteer, and I thought I'd create a little content for them too, so did some research on the site, and it's quite a fun adventure when you start going down those historic rabbit holes and find little snippets here and there. So it's a North American B25 Mitchell bomber, medium twin-engine bomber, maximum takeoff weight of 26,000 pounds. Royal Canadian Air Force purchased them at the end of the war and converted them, or had them converted into, trainers and for air photo reconnaissance predominantly. So this aircraft was out of Rockcliffe, outside of Ottawa in Ontario. The crew had been based in Penticton, doing photo reconnaissance, creating air photos of all of Canada. They used with these military veterans and aircraft, there was no or very limited air photo coverage of Canada. So they were flying grids out of Penticton for the summer. And in October, they were wrapping up their summer reconnaissance missions and getting ready to go home. So they had been staying at the Incola Hotel, which is a CP hotel on the shores of Okanagan Lake. Had been befriended the manager and his wife. The crew, 7 crew members died sadly in this crash, and 2 civilians who were the manager and his wife of the Incola Hotel. Several of these crew members were veterans of the Second World War. The pilot in command actually spent 3 months in a German prisoner of war camp, shot down over Germany, and imprisoned at the end from January to April of 1945. So sad, many of them distinguished veterans and survived the war only to die in this crash. They ostensibly were doing a snow reconnaissance with this flight. It appears that they were really transporting of some of the family members to Calgary so they could start their move back to Ottawa, Rockcliffe. Mm-hmm. So when they left Penticton, there were officially 7 RCAF crew members on board, but in fact there were 14 people on board, 7 civilians, 2 of the wives of crew members, and 3 of their children, plus the 2 CP employees out of Penticton. They flew to Calgary uneventfully. The weather was quite good, and then the plan was to turn around and come back to Penticton. So they're just taking the manager and his wife along just as a courtesy. You want to go for an airplane ride. So when it came to return, the weather had changed. They took off, but encountered some, I presume, icing, and came back to Calgary and had to overnight there. So probably caused, number one, mounting pressure to get these civilians back to Penticton and under the radar, that wasn't allowed to, under the RCF regulations to carry civilians. So that was on October the 17th, and on the 18th in the morning, they flight planned back to Penticton. Weather reports from TransCanada Airlines crews was that the weather was okay above 18,000 feet, but from 18,000 feet down, they were encountering icing and poor weather. So that's a problem because this aircraft service ceiling was marginally above 18,000 feet. So they departed flying on instrument flight rules, which at the time nav aids were quite limited. So they're on following these low frequency range flight paths. So they went from Calgary to Cranbrook and then over to Crescent Valley, which was the Castlegar radio station at the time. They're documented as reporting into Creston, and then they were also requested the weather from Crescent Valley, Castlegar, looking for the Penticton weather. And then they were heard flying over Red Mountain in Rossland, and then lastly by Wilf Gibbard, who ran pack horses up to the Old Glory weather station. And that was the last audible recording of their flight path. Yeah. So a massive search was mounted using both U.S. military aircraft and Canadian military aircraft, as well as civilian aircraft out of Penticton and Kelowna. A daunting task. It was a huge search area that, because of their fuel and range, that had to be searched. And this is the middle of October, so weather hampered the search, but they persisted for about 4 weeks and then had to call the search off. This is my speculation, but partly from the RCF accident investigation, but we had the pressure to return these civilians back to Penticton. Dismal weather reported from workers on Red Mountain and Wilf Gibbard both was that the weather was some of the worst weather they'd seen in April. Winds, freezing rain, poor visibility. So the accident report speculated that icing was a problem. This aircraft had no de-ice equipment on board. It was just becoming available, but it hadn't been retrofitted on that aircraft. So propellers, airframe, even the radio antennas were hampered by icing. So pressure, icing factors in the crash. And then, of course, back in the day, poor, very minimal nav aids, and of course they didn't have emergency locator beacons, so trying to track the crash site was a challenge, although the debris on the crash site would be indicative of no survivors. The aircraft looks like it probably stalled and crashed violently, and so that was determined by the RCF investigation. 5 years later, Wilf Gibbard happened to change his route, just hunting for ptarmigan, and saw a reflection in the sunlight and found pieces of the aircraft and went down to the RCMP and Rossland Trail, and the RCF came in, and Wilf Gibbard led them back into the site, and they conducted a 4-day investigation on site. And then again, October, the weather was getting poor, not conducive to camping out, and they gathered the information they needed. They conducted a memorial service for the victims, and what remains they found, they created a common burial site and erected a cross. I started hiking in there around maybe 2010 or so, and debris it's been picked over. People have removed artifacts over the years, and it's been how many years now? 60, 70 years. So, the vegetation has grown up. Volunteers have done some brushing in the area, so keeping it open and creating some, there is a little side trail going in there. So I've taken pictures and identified, so you can identify the engines. They've been pretty broken up. You can, none of the propeller blades remain. I think they've been hauled away, but you can see the hubs and some of the landing gear, and the tail section of this aircraft is quite distinctive with twin tails, so you can see remnants of that. My last hike in was in late August with a friend, and I wasn't aware of them, but he had seen them before. But both the wings are identifiable, but they lay about, I think, 100 meters away from the rest of the main crash site. So it's a easy hike. The local volunteers keep a trail open to it, and it's interesting to see these remains. To be noted, it is an archaeological site and it is a burial site, so it's important to respect the victims of the crash and also leave these artifacts undisturbed. So if someone has artifacts from the site and they are wondering what to do with them, if they got a hold of the Rossland Museum, and they could contact me, I'd happily try and organize a repatriation of some of those artifacts back up to the site. But that's where they should remain, and as part of that archaeological site and a memorial to these victims of the crash.
When we were researching the plane wreck up on the Plumin Basin, we found out that there's a local resident who was actually on the mountain when the plane crash happened.
Well, it was a young ski racer team, and everybody went out, and even if you were just a member of the club, to clear the hill, because there was no other way to cut the brush down or anything, and so everybody just turned out in the fall to do it. And it was, we were about halfway up the mountain, I would say between 10 and 5, and it was a cloudy day. I mean, there was no sun, and there was low hanging, and we couldn't see the tops of any of the mountains around us. But from where we were and down was clear. Like if you were going to trail, it would be clear all the way down the mountainside. So we were just there doing our thing, and our captain or whoever was helping us was Jimmy Douglas. And so any reporting of an accident or anything would have to go to him. Anyway, we were all there, and just the heavy clouds. And so there was no visibility. You couldn't even see, I would say, 2/3 of the way up the mountain.
Okay, was it cold? Were you in snow?
No, it was lovely. We were fall, the leaves, there was no snow around.
Okay, how old were you when that happened?
I was 14 years old.
Okay, so now tell me a little bit about the experience of the plane flying over. What do you remember from that?
We just heard the drone of the plane, and we were all listening. But Jimmy was obviously adult, and he was also involved with fire hall and first aid and all that. Mm-hmm. And so he heard the plane too, and he said, he made the comment that what was a plane doing up, where was it going? It was going in the fog. We didn't see the plane, we just heard it. And it seemed to come from like Columbia Airfield and Trail, I'm not sure where it came from, and it was heading north towards Nancy Green Lake or Sheep Lake then. And at that time there's no highways or any roads out there that way, just trails. And so anyway, we were there, and he made some comments about how is he going to see or what's he going to do. He's too low. And anyway, we were there for a while and we could hear it, and it was very faint because it was in the thick fogs. And all of a sudden there was a noise. I can't say how loud it was. It wasn't very loud. And Jimmy just was alerted right away. He said, I think it hit something. And so we continued the rest of the day on the hill and came home. And of course, then it announced that the plane was missing. And I'm sure Jim would be the first one on the telephone when he got home to report it, even if it wasn't already missing, because he's that type of a person.
So we left the Rossland Museum and drove the highway back up the hill towards Nancy Green Lake. And we kind of cheated a little bit because instead of taking the first really steep, quite gnarly section of the hike, I drove my little Toyota up the road. And it was a pretty rough road, just about everything my Toyota could take. But we're fairly close to the crash site where we are here now. And I'm going to hike up further into the bush above us to where the actual crash site is. Well, this part of the trail is pretty easy so far. I just wanted to mention that the weather can change really fast up here in the mountains. I've got my backpack with an extra warm layer in it, and I've got some water and a snack, and I got my trusty camera operator Ivy along with me to help rescue me if anything goes wrong. We've been hiking about 20 minutes and we came to this little clearing here where the fall leaves are really pretty, and it's just about the same time of year that the plane crash would have happened. End of October, we're at the beginning of October. Ivy says we're just about there, so I'm going to keep trundling my way up and see where we get to. Well, it's about 25 minutes, just a half an hour since we left the car. And it's always a little bit strange to come onto a site like this where people have died. I have kind of an interesting feeling when I get here. A site like this it's a grave site and it needs to be respected. You shouldn't take things from a site like this. On any archaeological site, the archaeologists will use where the placement of different elements of the site are to reconstruct the incident that might have happened here, or a village or whatever. And after the plane wreck happened here, there was this plaque was put on the tree, and it names all the people that were on board the plane when it crashed. And the destruction of the aircraft here is quite extensive. There's no doubt that the people all died as it crashed. It's just completely torn to shreds through the forest here. And we'll take some quiet time here and have a look around the site and maybe explore some of the artifacts that are still here to look at that can be identified. And just, when you come onto a site like this, just, have lots of respect for the people who passed here. And if you pick something up to look at it, put it back exactly where it was so that the next person can see it where it was as well. And that way the site remains intact for anybody else that might want to see it. Taking something away here is like stealing from a grave site, and it's just not the kind of thing you want to do. Wow. There's just wreckage everywhere here. It's spread as far down the hill as I can see here. Probably a fairly good guess that the plane came through this way and impacted in here somewhere and just broke apart and spread out. There's an awful lot of bent and torn aluminum, aircraft aluminum pipes and pieces of engine and sharp things I'm going to explore a few bits and pieces in the forest here, and I'm going to pick this piece up, but I'm going to put it right back where I found it in exactly the same way I found it if I can. And I'm not an aircraft mechanic or anything, but I know that these cables and pulleys in here are part of the controls of the aircraft. Things would have turned and something would have made these turn to control them. There's a part number stamped on the piece of equipment here, and some cables that would have connected to something that made them move. Some of these pieces have little lock wire in them so that they don't turn on their own and they stay adjusted exactly as they were. But it's some part of a controls for the plane. I'm going to put this one back down and pick up this other one here. It's right here. Same thing, this had parts that moved, and every important bolt has little notches in it that would have had a piece of wire through them so that they didn't turn. This one's got some control cables attached to it as well, and some other control pieces here. So, you know, it's hard to tell what this piece would have been. If you could reference this number to the rest of the aircraft, you could probably figure out exactly what it is. And it's 82584333, and this piece underneath, the big piece, is 82584434. So the numbers are all in some sort of order. There's a little pin in this one to keep it from turning. I'm going to put this one back where I found it as well, and explore some other parts. It's pretty sad sight. I feel sad for the people who died here. Here I am in the middle of the wreckage field, and there's some interesting parts here, and I can't identify everything for sure, but this is some sort of a tank. It was probably round or oval shaped in its day when it was intact. Might have been a fuel tank or an air tank or something. An aircraft person would be able to tell you. This is the cylinder head and the top end of one of the pistons that powered this aircraft, and it had a couple of huge radial engines in it, and we'll have a closer look at one of the other engines in a minute. And if you look over here, there's another engine cylinder as well, and they have all these little rings on it for air cooling, and this is all air cooled up here. So this is, you know, part of an engine that was just shred all over the place. There's an alternator down here. Looks like an automotive alternator, but a little bit bigger in size. And then this big piece behind me, I don't know what it is, part of a wing, part of a tail. It's attached to the piece below it. It's probably the tail section. It looks like the rudder, or the rudder could have been attached in here, and I don't know where that rudder piece is. Maybe it's this piece here, but it's sure spread out. I see another engine cylinder down there, and there's another one over there. So one of the engines, and there's the top end of the engine over there. We'll go and have a look at that as well. It's always impressive how long the aircraft metal lasts in the forest. It doesn't decompose very quickly. It's coated with coatings that make it last a long time, and these are all tubes or conduit, I guess you could call it, that the wires ran in, and the wires were all protected by this so that any vibrations didn't cut into the wires, and all these metal connectors that would screw together in places were all tied together. It's hard to know what part of the aircraft this was. And then if you look up on this corner here, right here, you can see a huge massive copper wires, and you can tell they're copper because of the green inside, and this connector would have come apart. This is the front end of the engine, one of the two engines, and this little piece here would have been the nose cone of the engine, and this is one of the ends of the propeller here, and there's another one here, and there's another one buried down into the dirt there, and this one looks like it might have sheared off, but this one's definitely been cut off, and it's kind of a sad story that somebody would want to take that home with them. But so I just noticed this piece on the ground here, and I think it's probably some kind of a tank. It could be a fuel tank top or something, but there's a lid that would open and close. It has a space for lock wire, like I mentioned on some of the other ones. Plus this little gauge here, and this little dial inside would turn depending on how much of whatever it held is in it. Could have been liquid, it could have been pressurized like air or something like that. And then I noticed down here that this is all melted, and it's obvious that there was a fire here after the aircraft had burned, and this piece of the tank or the part of the aircraft is quite melted, and behind me there's quite a bit more melted aircraft metal as well. It's an awful lot going on in here, cables and wires and dials, and I don't know what that was. Different kind of metal here. It's not aluminum, it's some kind of stainless steel. It could be stainless steel. So this, I think, is the back end of one of the engines. I'm not 100% sure, but it looks like it to me. The cylinders are going around in a circle here. 1, 2, 3 I can see here, and then there's an alternating one, 4 and 5. This was, I'm pretty sure, more than 9 cylinders. It might have been 14. And if I look down here, I think I'm going to take a totally uneducated guess. This is a set of points for the engine itself, and there's one here, and there would have been a second set up here, so it was dual points, and each one of these would have connected to one of the spark plugs. And if I count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 of them in a circle as the piece would spin around, and it would fire the engine off each one of these points. It's quite badly damaged. It's all ceramic in here, and then the rotor would have been this piece here, and it would have spun around and made those connections. And then the second one in here, it's pretty badly damaged. But so if I'm correct, and I'm not going to say for sure, the propeller would have been out there at that end, and it's pretty big engine. I suspect that piece up there in the forest with the propellers that are removed would have connected on this engine right up at the front here, in here. Must have been quite the crash. I'm slowly working my way down through the wreckage here. It's quite an extensive field of debris. There's stuff strewn for a couple of 100 feet here. And even further than I can see. I don't even know when it stops. I'm going to continue just working my way down through here for a few minutes. Then we'll head back down. We've got a bit of a hike back to the car. Okay, I just wanted to point out a couple more pieces here. This is the nose cone, if you want to call it that, from the other engine. And you can see where the propellers would have mounted in these 3 places here. And this was a variable pitch propeller, so they rotated in the housing here so they could change the pitch. And over here, this is a piece of the landing gear. It's a big wheel, obviously heavy aluminum because of the way it's lasted, and this would have been the tire and the tube, inner tube. You can still see it says Goodyear on here, and I guess this is early style disc brakes in there that would have kept it going, and part of the suspension, this shiny part here. And then way over here is what remains of the other engine, and there's the back end like the other one had, I think. This is the starting motor, and it's possible that this engine had 2 starting motors, because this is the insides or the guts of another motor, or maybe an alternator, but it looks like it's very similar to this one here, so I'm guessing it possibly had 2 motors that would start. It's a pretty big motor. It's a pretty big engine to spin. 14 cylinders. Again, these are the pistons that would have gone in and out of the the cylinder tubes. Here, this one's actually still inside the tube. The piston rings are gone from this one, but they're still intact. And this is a huge engine and a massive amount of power to fly that aircraft through the sky. Because of the fire, there's not a whole lot of color left on many of the parts of the aircraft, but this one has a very definitive red and blue stripe on it. This is one of the vertical stabilizers, and you can see from the photograph of the B25 where this piece would have fit on the airplane. And so it was the upright piece. The rudder would have attached in here and swung left and right, and this would have been the part that steered the aircraft through the air. And there's even a little piece of a light here, and you can still see a tiny piece of bulb still intact in the light housing. Gonna head up one more little tiny hike up into the forest to see if we can find the wingtips of the plane. When it crashed in here, it came down through the forest and it started to come apart before it even hit the ground, and the wingtips are still up there. It was a bit of a hike, clambering through the trees to get up here, but we found the last of the wing, one of them anyway, down here in the forest. It's a pretty significant piece of wing too. There's a big chunk of it there, but this is the main part, and you can see that it was just torn completely from the aircraft. It's yellow on this side. I don't know if this is the top side or the bottom side, but it's a huge piece of the plane, and we're about 100 meters in that direction from the rest of the wreckage, so I'm guessing the plane came in from sort of this direction and probably hit trees, which took the wings off, and then it just continued on in that direction. But there's an awful lot of wreckage here, and apparently there's another wing up here as well somewhere. I'll have a quick look for it, but I'm not going to spend too much more time up here. I'm going to head back down to the site and have one last look and then head down. Well, we came from just over there and hiked through, clambered around, and here's the other piece of wing that's pretty much a match to the one that we first saw. And if I just spin around slowly here, this is the aileron from that wing or from the other one, but another big piece of the aircraft. This one's hardly damaged. I'd like to thank you for joining this episode of Hiking Back in Time at the B25 bomber crash site above Rossland BC, and I'll leave you with a photograph of the B25 in flight.